Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. We know we have attendees connecting from different places around the world. Thanks so much for being with us today. It is our pleasure to welcome you to the third webinar of this series of workshops focused on traceability, which is organized by WWF as part of the GCRF Trade Hub initiative. This work is funded by the UKRI Global Challenges Research Fund. Before I present today's expert moderator, I'd like to very briefly remind you that the webinar will be recorded and made available on YouTube. Your microphones will be muted and your camera off, so please write any comments or questions through the chat, including the name of the speaker you are addressing your question to. We will raise them during the Q&A time, except for two speakers, Luis and Ida, that will have to leave before. So Jean, our moderator, will let you know when you have to have them on the chat, and they will be answered on the chat. If you had any technical issues, please send a direct chat message to the technical support account on the chat. And now we can start. It is our pleasure to present Jean, Senior Program Officer at WWF China, who is responsible for the work of sustainable soy supply chains. Jean Shang, welcome, and thank you very much for moderating today's webinar. It is our pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Julie. Hello, everyone. I am Jin Shang, and it's my great honor to having this opportunity to meet you all. And thank you for introducing me, Julie. And thank you guys, all the speakers and all the audiences coming and joining us online at this webinar on soil traceability, which is part of the series of traceability workshops organized by WWF and the Trade Hub. Addressed to the private and the public sectors, we aim to review and discuss the existing context to identify concrete actions and the responsibilities that can facilitate supply chain transparency and the resilience for the Chinese food industry. And today we are going to include the following contents, something like social and environmental risk linked to soil production, current context in the soil traceability space, and case studies of the soil traceability, and the potential for technological innovation in the soil traceability space, and also the role of the government support. And for sure, it's gonna be an informative and a productive event for all of us. And so it is the time to invite the first speaker, and it's my pleasure to introduce the first one, Luis Nakagawa, a researcher in governance and sustainability for the Trade Hub at Imoflora and the CBREP, will share her finding on the social impacts linked to soil production. And here is a reminder that please post your questions for Luis on the chat box while she presents, so that she can answer them online, and she may go offline ahead of schedule. Many thanks, Luis. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, WWF and WCMC Trade Hub for this invitation. It's a pleasure to share a few highlights from our study here. So the idea is to bring the social impacts driven by soy expansion. And the big question is, what are the social impacts linked to the soy production? Next slide, please. So the literature says that there is a dispute of narratives about the role of soy expansion with a great focus on deforestation. Also, the performance of soy production regions is not homogeneous. There is a great focus on monetary indicators, and it's necessary to consider other dimensions to analyze the impacts on the well-being of soy production regions. And finally, it's necessary to understand the interdependencies in the land use changes. The socioeconomic and environmental impacts are territorial, and there are no boundaries of those impacts. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we are bringing our main findings. The first one is that although the positive effects generated by soy, the benefits are not accessible to all the surrounding populations. The second one, soy cultivation leads to concentrated land ownership and higher land prices, and it tends to expand income inequality. The third, as soy production is expensive, it forces small farmers to lease or sell their properties and move to urban areas, cities, and to new forest frontiers. Next slide, please. The fourth one, the smallholders can compete equally with big producers. So the soy value chain excludes smallholders. The fifth, social indicators in soy-relevant municipalities in Brazil show that the positive effect of soy production is limited when it comes to reducing extreme poverty. In large areas of soy cultivation, the unemployment rate is higher. Next slide, please. So soy production is a masculine activity. Women's participation is only between 11 and 14% in Brazil. Also, the soy expansion has involved with land and water conflicts in the Brazilian Cerrado, and also with negative effects on human health because of the pesticides use, especially the spraying. And monoculture of soy has exacerbated food insecurity in production regions. Next slide, please. Here I would like to share with you a portrait of the social indicators of Brazil's top 10 richest agribusiness producers municipalities in 2020. You can see the 10 biggest municipalities, all of them produce soy. You can see the ranking, the name of the municipality, the state. In the columns on the right, you can see the average income, inequality, poverty, infant mortality, and unemployment. And here we are comparing those one with the high average comparing to the average of the state. And you can see, so the red ones, the municipalities have a low average comparing to the state average. So the message here is that the production performance is not being translated into better indicators of poverty and inequality. Next slide, please. Here we are bringing the typology of territorial impacts in the set of soy production municipalities in Brazil. We separate in 3 groups, the group A with high production, with high social indicators, more social indicators. The group B, high production with less social indicators. And the group C, high production and 0 social indicators. So the column A, the group A, you can see the percentage of the states, they are a very low percentage of high production, soy high production municipalities and with good social indicators. The message here is that there are no positive social indicators in most of the soy relevant municipalities with big production in Brazil. Next slide, please. So the temporal evolution of social indicators according to the econometric modeling that we presented last year shows that the positive impacts are related to the increase in GDP and income. In municipalities with the largest area of soy cultivation, the unemployment rate is higher. There is no correlation between soy production and improvement in well-being indicators. And the worst performance in social indicators occurs in the producing municipalities of the Midwest, North, and Northeast regions. Next slide, please. Here is to bring a little bit of the gender inequality. So women are underrepresented as leaders in the agricultural establishments. And in soy production, this participation is even smaller. And it's remarkable the low participation of women in the leadership of the soy production properties. We can see here the industry farming in the left column and the family farming in the right column. And this percentage is the participation of women in soy production. It's very low percentage of women working and leading this production. Next slide, please. Here we would like to bring the conflicts happening in the Amazon, especially in the Cerrado, and the idea is to show the conflicts that have systematically increased mainly in the areas of soybean production expansion. The conflicts in Brazil have grown in the last decade. New conflicts have emerged, and water scarcity and access is one of them. And the growing presence of international groups and finance capital has also been another problem. 70% of the conflicts are happening in the frontier between the Amazon and the Cerrado in both biomes. So summing all the percentages. Next slide, please. And there is a deterioration in food security indicators with the agribusiness expansion in the Brazilian economy. The lack of data makes it difficult to establish a correlation between soy production and food security. The regions marked by the agribusiness expansion have the worst food security indicators, and the Mato Piba region is an example of how soybean expansion does not result in improved food security indicators. Next slide, please. And here are some thoughts about the traceability and indicators to monitor. So there's no traceability system in place in Brazil that deals with the social impacts of soy expansion, and how can those impacts be addressed. Retailers and importers and also investors play a key role through the enforcement of investments of command and control, through social commitments supported by civil society, governments that respect value and promote just and sustainable trade, and through halting investments and financing activities that negatively impact forest conservation and put livelihoods and human rights at risk. Next slide, please. And I think that is the last one. And thinking about the indicators, social indicators that could be monitored by those key actors. One of them is the forced labor. Another one, the land and water conflicts. The third one, the invasion of indigenous and traditional communities' lands. And the last one, the pesticides contamination. We have important database here in Brazil, the CPT database, also the FUNAI database. So those guys, those actors, key actors could use those data to monitor and create a kind of an indicator to monitor those impacts when they trade the soy. So that's it. The next slide, please. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and please feel free to contact me by email. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you, Luis. Many thanks you for reminding us the current status about the soil cultivation and its expansion, and also related to the social relationships and something about the social indicators, which leave us a great and general about the soil status in Brazil. And now, Andre Vasconcelos, global engagement lead at Trace, was our next speaker. So before I invite him to present his presentation, I will give a briefing. He is the global engagement lead at Trace and the global canopy. He will explain their insights on the climatic impacts and the legal compliance of soil production in Brazil. Thank you, Andre. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks everyone. Pleasure to be here. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So just next slide, please. Just wanted to first bring a little bit of context and mentioning that soy is a widely used commodity for animal feeds, which touches on food security in some areas, for example, in China. But at the same time, as Luis mentioned, because it needs so much area, the way it's produced now needs extensive areas for production. For example, in the case of Brazil, it covers 40% of all the cultivated cropland in Brazil. It also brings a lot of challenges in terms of social and environmental impact. So I was asked to bring a little bit of, what are these challenges right now that we are facing in terms of climatic, environmental, but also the risks that importing markets are faced or exposed when it comes to legal compliance as well. And I will be focusing today mostly in the links between Brazil and China. Next slide, please. So I wanted to summarize my presentation or bring my presentation into 3 main points. First one is actually mentioning that deforestation when it comes to soy production continues to be a challenge and brings supply risks. Next one, please. So if we look globally, about 90% of deforestation is directly or indirectly linked to agriculture expansion, and soy and beef being key commodities that are linked to those challenges, as well as palm oil, for example, in Indonesia. Next one. And it also, the land use or the expansion of those commodities, in this case, soy here, brings a lot of, or is responsible for a lot of emissions. Globally, deforestation accounts for about 11% of all the CO2 emissions. But when it comes to importing soy producing countries like Brazil, we see that the deforestation and land use conversion accounts for as much as 50% of all the CO2 emissions. And when we also include the emissions coming from agriculture sector, it can go up to 75% of all Brazil's CO2 emissions. Next slide, please. So going specifically on soy production in Brazil, it's one of the key drivers of deforestation, both directly but indirectly. I mean, it's important to recognize that a lot of progress has been made, but there is a lot of challenges. And in 2020, we saw 562,000 of soy harvested in recently deforested areas, which it's almost the size of Shanghai if we compare in terms of a city. It is important to mention that it's not just soy, not just replacing forests, but mostly other ecosystems, including other types of vegetation like savanna or grasslands in the Cerrado, but also in the Pampas in the south of Brazil. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, a lot of this deforestation land use change for soy, and the production itself generates a lot of emissions. So in Brazil, soy production, sorry, if you go back to the slides, it accounts for 103 million tons of CO2 emissions. Just checking if the slides, I can't see the slides anymore. Yeah, if you went back, please. Yeah, so, and a growing or recent number of studies have shown that this deforestation and the implications that deforestation causes on climate change are leading to a lot of negative impacts in the productivity of agricultural commodities in general. And just bringing here an example in the soy, there was an unusual drought in the south of Brazil, in Rio Grande do Sul and Paraná, in 2020 and 2021, that caused a reduction of up to 46% of soy productivity. So we are already seeing how deforestation and the changing in temperature, in climate in general, because soy is definitely a rain-dependent culture in the case of Brazil, that these impacts are leading to changes in commodities price, and it can lead to implications to food supply or supply of the soy, and then to food security more broadly. So the next message that I wanted to bring, the next slide, please, is that to understand this impact and to be able to mitigate this impact, it's critical that we have traceability all the way back to the farm level, and as well as transparency to really understand what are these risks and the mitigation actions, as I said. So next slide, please. And what we do here in Trace is really, we don't do traceability all the way back to the farm, but we bring, we connect many data sets to bring more transparency to the supply chains, and then to understand where, for example, the commodities or the soy that is coming or importing China is coming from, and what are the risks associated with that. So next slide, please. And with that information, we can understand, and as I said, I'm going to focus here on soy, from where the soy that they are importing from Brazil is coming from. Next slide. And therefore, we can estimate how much of this soy is coming from recently deforested areas. And then we created a metric called deforestation exposure to really understand what's the number in a quantitative way, what's the exposure of China markets, of the EU, and many other large consumers of soy from Brazil or from other countries. And looking at this trade between China and Brazil, we saw that China is exposed to 237,000 of deforestation linked to these imports. Next one. And we see that there is a higher concentration of China's exposure. Next, yeah, there we go. Concentration in field producing municipalities. So we see that half of China's deforestation exposure is concentrated in only 30 municipalities, which doesn't mean necessarily that, these are the areas where it needs to be focused the traceability, because it has to be, as I showed in the previous slide, the deforestation exposure is also spread in other municipalities. So it's critical that transparency and traceability, is actually looked at the whole area. But these areas can be important for focusing engagement with suppliers, provision of incentives for conservation and restoration. Next one. And the final message that I wanted to bring here, which is a new study that we produced with partners in Brazil, is that there is also a high risk of compliance with national laws. And in the case of Brazil, next one, we looked at all the soy production in the Amazon, in the Cerrado, which comes to 19 million hectares. Next one. And we saw that about 16% of all the soy production were in farms with strong evidence of non-compliance with key elements of Brazil's forest codes. Next one. About 26% of this soy was in farms which were likely compliant with the forest codes. Next one. And about 58% was on farms with potential risks of non-compliance, either due to non-authorized deforestation on the farm or to deficits of legal reserve. And it's important to mention that so far, we don't have data to verify this 58% in detail. So next one. So just to finalize, that is critical that we have data and more transparency in the supply chain to really be able to verify to what extent all the soy producers are in compliance with the law. So just bringing here again the importance of transparency when it comes to data and systems, and also traceability, and the importance obviously of data and science to really inform consumer markets and companies where more resources are needed and where attention is critical to improve and to have more solutions in the soy supply chain. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andre. Many thanks for you and to reminding us the challenge and the supply risk may bring from the deforestation, and especially the amount of soil harvested in a deforested area is almost the same as the Shanghai. It's quite impressed me a lot. And also the data shows us how the China performed a very important role on the traceability. Thanks, Andre, again. To continue, so the next speaker is Daniel E. Silva, conservation specialist at WWF Brazil, who works on soil and beef supply chain traceability, and will explain the current context in the soil traceability space. Thank you, Daniel. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jean. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So today I will bring some information about the current context of traceability in the soy supply chain in Brazil. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I will first bring a concerning number about the soy's footprint on ecosystem loss. This graph mainly shows that 13% of all the destruction in the Brazilian Cerrado that occurred in 2017 has been used for soy expansion the 5 following years. So this trend is increasing and we have a lot of concern about that. This is exactly where traceability is useful because it can reduce this number to 0. Next slide, please. Yeah, so why traceability is necessary? Because with robust traceability, there is no more excuse for companies to source from farms that have not responsible practices in place. In other words, traceability can ensure sustainability in the company's operation. And we have seen that some investigative reports that link human rights issues or natural destruction to commodity production have bring some really interesting impacts. It is clear that no company wants to be associated with these issues. Next slide, please. So what is robust traceability? First, traceability should be full scope. This means that it should be applied to the farm polygon for all the suppliers and in all the territories. This is an important principle because in Brazil, the illegality, the social environmental issues are spread in the country, and also because these issues mainly occur at the very first level of the supply chain. Then traceability systems and methods should be publicly transparent. This is an important component of traceability. And they should use accurate, recognized, and multi-source data as far as possible. Traceability should be cheap for the producer and for the buyers also. And of course, traceability should be verified by third-party audits, publicly and freely available. Next slide, please. Yeah, and full traceability is highly beneficial for companies. In fact, traceability with transparency allows companies to better control the risk in their supply chain. We are talking about legality, company reputation, fraud, environment, human rights, market loss, and so on. For example, traceability can reduce the risk of soil laundering and avoid the leakage of deforestation or conversion, and also of harmful social issues to less controlled territories. Full traceability is essential because natural destruction, illegality associated to the commodity production, and also the social issues do not fully spatially overlap in the country. This means that the risk for the company can be everywhere, and traceability allows to uncover these risks and control them. Another benefit of full traceability is that its costs are becoming cheaper when you scale traceability, and because we will not need to manage different standards, which is generally less efficient for the companies. And of course, by setting a full traceability to the farm level, the sector will be able to attend any market, which is an opportunity for the company because the market is getting more exigent. Next slide, please. So what we have today on soil traceability in Brazil, we have systems that use blockchain, but we also have systems that use public state information, and these systems can be private or public. How does it work? The Department of Treasury generates a first document, an invoice, when there is a transaction, for example, producer selling soy to an operator, and then a transport document is produced to the transport for the transport of the volume. Both documents follow the volumes and contain information about the seller, the buyer, the destination, the volume, the transporter, etc. And of course, this information can be complemented in a system, for example, with soy potential yield in the farm. But today we will have two relevant presentations on how a government system is using such data to trace soy. Next slide, please. So we have some gaps and challenge. For the gaps, first, the polygons used to delimit the farms in Brazil are based on the rural registry, which is a CAR, which is self-declaratory. So the government needs to progress faster on its validation, and also the CAR should be systematically informed in the invoices. Then it will be ideal to have a unique system at large scale to control soy origin, and also lots of private systems like transparency, which is again against one essential principle of robust traceability. And we have the challenge of building anti-fraud tools to focus the efforts of check where we can reduce the risk of soy triangulation, for example. And we have the challenge of indirect sourcing, and for that, the supplier have to cascade the same traceability requirements to downstream supplier all along the supply chain. Next slide, please. So about the cost, is cost a problem? First, we are talking about the Brazilian soy sector with a high competitive agriculture and high soy quality. Then Brazil has the technological capacity to trace the product and to monitor environmental compliance. And of course, we have some gaps and challenge, but traceability at large scale is feasible and already progressing. And full traceability is precisely a way to reduce the cost of traceability because of scaling. Also, we have free data and traceability tools in Brazil, and we will see some relevant examples with Felipe and Gustavo today. Next slide, please. And this is the last one. So how can we support traceability? The buyer's company can make robust monitoring and verification to the farm level a condition to access that market. They can also support large-scale and relevant traceability initiative in sourcing country. And finally, companies can support incentives for responsible suppliers that implement traceability. And the state and national government can collaborate to support large-scale initiatives in Brazil that follow the principle of strong traceability. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel. Very interesting speech. And I think most of us can get you for a general and informative introduction to traceability. And we also know about the benefits from the food traceability and how to do that, and also about the challenges and the cost as well. And to continue with this interesting round of presentations, we now have a couple of speakers, Ida Brecken-Cloudy. She is the Senior Advisor, Sustainable Supply Chains at Rainforest Foundation, Norway, and Anita Yusufai, founder of Executive Director of Clean Harvest, who will let us know about the characteristics of an existing MRV system for soil in Brazil. And here is just a quick reminder about that. You are suggested to post your questions on the chat during the presentation, because Anita will leave soon after finish her sharing, so she can answer it online according to her time. Thank you both ahead of time for sharing your knowledge. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting us to speak at this webinar. We would like to share our ongoing collaboration with the Norwegian salmon industry in constructing a well-monitored and traceable soy supply chain. So I will give some background to the collaboration and the situation that we are at today. Next slide, please. So the Norwegian salmon industry is a huge consumer of Brazilian soy, which is used in salmon feed. And Norwegian salmon feed producers have for many years purchased certified soy volumes to ensure that the soy volumes that enter their supply chain are deforestation-free and compliant with a very specific Norwegian GMO prohibition law. And the volumes that enter the supply chain has been certified through the Proterra certification scheme. And in 2018, RFN published a report that exposed the salmon industry's links to deforestation. And we found that buying certified soy volumes did not eliminate deforestation risk in the Norwegian salmon supply chain sufficiently. We argue that as long as the industry buys soy from suppliers that trade non-certified deforestation soy to other markets, the salmon producers indirectly contribute to deforestation through the financing of the soy suppliers' deforestation practices for other supply chains. We also argue that buying certified soy does not change the deforestation dynamics in Brazil, but rather create two parallel markets for soy. One market for certified deforestation-free soy and one market for non-certified deforestation soy. And if we look at the global market, we see this very well demonstrated, seeing that only 4% of the global soy trade is certified. Well, that's under the RTRS scheme, but it is not likely that certification will be the correct means to eliminate deforestation risk. Next slide, please. So our clear recommendation was that in order for the salmon industry to eliminate deforestation risk in their soy supply chain, they must commit to only buy soy from suppliers that are deforestation-free across their entire operations. And in practice, this means that the salmon industry must only purchase soy from suppliers that have committed to the 2020 cut-off date for the Cerrado. So the idea is that they must move the demand from deforestation-free soy volumes over to a supplier company level and demand deforestation-free suppliers. And the next slide, please. So in 2021, Norwegian salmon producers announced that they would only purchase soy from deforestation-free soy suppliers. And following that, the 3 suppliers to the Norwegian salmon industry, Karamuru, Imcopa, and CJ Selecta, they committed to become fully deforestation-free soy suppliers with a 2020 cut-off date. And with this public commitment, these 3 companies became the very first soy processors operating in Brazil to become fully deforestation-free soy suppliers. And this has fueled the discussion regarding clean suppliers or deforestation-free suppliers, and has argued that deforestation requirements must be met on an operational company level, in addition to a volume level within the supply chains. Next slide, please. Now, a commitment to become deforestation-free is good, but we need a solid MRV system and a traceability system to check compliance with this commitment. And as many of you know, today, individual companies conduct their own MRV, and these may be flawful because they heavily rely on self-reporting. They give little guarantee to outsiders that implementation is compliant with the commitment that they have made. So together with the Norwegian salmon industry and the salmon feed producers, Rainforest Foundation Norway and Clean Harvest and WWF Brazil is constructing an MRV system to oversee this commitment made by the industry. And what we want and hope is that this MRV system can set a new bar for accountability, transparency, and verification that can become sort of a gold standard or an ideal MRV for other global protein producing industries to follow. Next slide, please. So this is a big project, so we're only going to give you some overall principles for the ideal MRV. And we have spent some time looking into the current practices, but we're not going to have time to dig into that. But the idea is that this MRV should not be a privately held certification scheme, but an open access public practice that can be used by anyone and owned by no one. And the system would need buy-in and involvement in Brazilian NGOs, and of course ensure that the volumes under the system is compliant with the EUDR. Next slide, please. And just to give you a glance at the current salmon industry's soy supply chain, Protera is verifying the part of the value chain between the trader and the importer, as you can see in this slide. And we need better information about if and how this part of the value chain from producer to trader is monitored, because this is the part of the value chain where which is mostly exposed to deforestation and human rights violations. And we have very little information about what happens before the soy volumes enter the export ports. Next slide, please. So, just in short, overall concerns with the current MRV practices, which is conducted by Protera. The information provided is not allowed for any verification by downstream customers. So that means the Norwegian salmon feed producers or salmon producers have no access to actually to what is happening in their supply chain and how this information can be verified. It does not enable Norwegian companies to carry out proper due diligence. All trust is put on Protera, which does not have, as far as we know by today, it does not have open enough systems. And yeah, it is not an open access public system. The current system does not have buy-in from civil society in Brazil or elsewhere. And it is not clear whether or not the current M&R, so the monitoring and reporting practices, has enough information to detect and prevent deforestation and human rights violations. And Protera does all the MRV and oversees compliance with the commitment, but the system has some shortcomings to become the MRV standard that we wish to see. So in short, what this MRV project will suggest is what information should be disclosed by the soy suppliers, how often it should be disclosed, where it should be disclosed, and not at least what data soy suppliers should gather and report on. Yeah, next slide, please. That's all. We're very ahead of time, I guess, which can be good in some cases.
Thank you, you all. Thank you, Ida and Anita, for reminding us that, yeah, actually we learned a lot of experiences from the salmon industry work in Norway related to the soil supply chain, and the overall concerns shows at last will require all kinds of stakeholders to work with together. And thank you both again. And to continue, Dr. Philippe Neuss, he is a researcher at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, and he is also the director of the Center for Territorial Intelligence in Brazil. And he will illustrate the technical aspects of a governmental soil traceability system. Thank you, Mr. Neuss. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be here and discussing such an important issue. And we here want to discuss and give some highlights of the technical aspects of a government traceability system in Brazil, soy. But we can also expand these technical aspects for other crops, other commodities. Next one, please. And there are many issues and technical aspects to deal with. A government system must integrate a lot of information and handle big data, law requirements, forest code, for instance, and it must be a system that can be transparent and replicable. So we need, in our vision, public system needs a sound science rooted. We need a science-based system because we have to deal with a lot of information and we have to put this on a transparent way. So our group has been working with sound science to support public policy for decades, and we have been partnering with other states, Minas Gerais State, Maranhão State, and Gustavo can give us some information about that. And we need a team incorporating technical aspects, scientific aspects, technological aspects, because there are a lot of issues to deal with. And to put a system online is not so trivial. So we need to put this in a transparent way, showing the algorithms, the maps, the inputs, and the results. So, and the forest code and the Brazil's requirements to deal with the compliance of the soil sector must be analyzed by computer systems, because we have a lot of private projects to deal with. Next slide, please. And the forest code is one of the pillars of a public traceability system, because the forest code regulates conservation on rural private properties. We need to analyze per property, per farm, the hilltops preservation areas, the legal reserve, because our law mandates that the landowner must assign a percentage of the native vegetation area, and it ranges from 20% in other biomes and to 80% in the Amazon biome. And we have to analyze if there is a forest surplus or a deficit in terms of environment compliance. We have a lot of requirements to analyze and to compute these areas in terms of riparian preservation areas, legal reserves, and so on. And almost 50% of Brazil's native vegetation occurs on private properties. So the forest code is essential to build a strong traceability system for soil. Next one, please. And the CAR is the online environment registry in Brazil. It covers more than 7 million private properties, but it's a self-report data. So we need the public system. We need to analyze properties, and we need a tool to handle a big special data problem. So there are a lot of information that you have to display, analyze at the property level, and to establish if this farm can be categorized as a compliant or a non-compliant farm. Next one, please. And of course, we can aggregate those numbers, the legal reserve surplus, deficit, EPP deficit, and a lot of information for the entire country. But in a traceability system, we have to go to a farm level. And this is an important issue, because CAR allows Brazil and all states to have a traceability system covering all private properties, being direct or indirect supplier. So a traceability system must show data on the environmental balance of each private property located in one state. Please, next one, please. And of course, there are some different realities across the states in Brazil. We have states with high rates of deforestation after 2008, which is a year very important for our forest code regulation and analysis. And we have to put information about the legality of the deforestation, because if you have authorization, you can deforest, but you need to check this at the property level. Next one, please. And agricultural traceability is a reality in science, and we published this paper in 2020, and we showed that a small minority is responsible for most of the illegal or legal deforestation in Brazil. And it's very important to show this small minority, to put this in a transparency and public system, because we have indirect providers, we have direct providers, and for cattle or for soy, we can have both. But we need to put information for all the farms in a state, in a territory, in order to show compliance or not compliance. So it's very important to use the CAR system, the environmental register, to analyze the compliance in regarding the forest code and to trace back the commodities and the food supplier in order to check if you are seeing all the supply chain or you just see a small part. So that's why we need a public system to integrate the car system and to trace back all providers. And Selo Verde is a public system in Pará, in Minas Gerais already, and all this information you can have access on these magazines, and of course a lot of information are shown in the websites, but this is an important step to provide full transparency regarding deforestation risk supply chains in Brazil. Next one, please. And Selo Verde in Pará covers more than 300,000 rural properties with daily updates, because it is very important to show a recent photo, a recent diagnosis of each rural property. So the system runs every day to provide information regarding different social and environmental aspects of our legislation and production. Next one, please. And in Pará, we developed a high-resolution map because there are a lot of requirements in our forest code that needs high resolution. For instance, the riparian preservation areas, and to state that a farm is compliant or non-compliant with the forest code and the production is deforestation free. For instance, we need to develop new tools and forest high resolution mapping. Next slide, please. And we have this same system operating in Minas Gerais state, covering more than 1 million rural properties, providing transparency and information for cattle, for soy and coffee, and in Pará, soy and cattle. So these are two examples of public systems operating right now, manipulating different types of data, a big data problem, and with science, transparency, and of course, technology, we can provide information for the markets, the governments, the citizens. Next one, please. And then I think this is the last one. No, you can jump this thing. It's a height, and you can jump. And I think it's okay. I think I'm running out of time. Thank you very much. We think that public traceability system can be science-based and provide and contribute to this discussion, provide information regarding deforestation risk supply chains. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Noyes. Give us such an informative presentation. And always the technical part is always difficult to understand, but thank you again for giving us so many interesting diagrams that make traceability a reality. And after all this knowledge, we still have 2 presentations left. We will now listen to Mr. Gustavo de Souza de Oliveira Victorio. He is the physical auditor from the Treasury Department of Maranhão state in Brazil, who will speak about the role of the government in enabling enhanced soil traceability in Maranhão state. Thank you, Mr. Victorio. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, everyone. I tend to talk to you here about the role of governments in enabling and facilitating the traceability of soybeans here in the state and Maranhão. Next, please. Talk about the agribusiness here in state of Maranhão. In 2020, we had agribusiness gross domestic product representing 12%. The soybean planted area in the state compared to 2013 increased by 68%, while soybean production in the same period increased by 110%. So you can see that your production has increased much more than the planted area, which shows that your production has increased considerably. This makes Maranhão today the 10th largest producer of the soybeans in Brazil. Next, please. And more than 50% of soy produced in Maranhão is exported to China and other 50% to several other countries, mainly European Union countries. And we have a port, the port of Itaqui, an extremely strategic location for export, mainly to Asia, ever reducing the cost of freight. Next, please. And next. And the Maranhão decided to use the technology to monitor the agribusiness sector, mainly soy and corn. So a tool was developed that's a tool to monitor agriculture production in the state, and this is an image of the tool in operation, where you can see the mapping of the entire state of Maranhão and where there is soybean and corn production in the state. We can see the municipalities with the risk production and the productive production and planted area of municipality. And this tool uses intelligence, artificial intelligence, geotechnology, to monitor this agriculture and also control social environmental issues. Next, please. So this image where we see to monitor instrument production and productive, the planted area in each municipality in the state of Maranhão, we can select the reversed year. Here you can check the production of the property. Next, please. Here we check the production of property, and then you can see that the tool itself identifies the productive plots of that farm. And then we can estimate very accurately how much that farm is producing compared with the sales invoice for that farm and also trace that property. Next, please. Next. In other words, you can cross-reference data from that farm with government, social, environmental data, from indigenous area, quilombolas, deforestation data. So you can cross-reference this information and visualize it in the tool. Next. Next. So this image that shows a property that has an area of deforestation, just as this one shows a property that is within indigenous land. Next. So this one red is the property, blue would be the indigenous land, so you can have this traceability. Next. Furthermore, we can cross-reference data from that farm with data from CAR, Rural Environmental Registry, which is your document from the Brazilian government. Next. Next, please. Furthermore, we have possibility of the platform make crossing for the purpose environmental license for that area. So we cross-reference various data, including deforestation and issues reports with visual analysis, so that we can grant or not the environmental license for that particular area. Furthermore, the tool has a functionality for monitoring native vegetation, where we use economic ecological zoning of the state of Maranhão through phytophysiognomy maps, where we can verify the various characteristics of this large Brazilian state. And then we can also monitor this native vegetation for calculation, include biomass, and we can check deforestation in a timely manner. So we can see this deforestation more frequently, so you can take actions to avoid this type of serious problem for your lives here in our state of Maranhão and consequently in Brazil. Next, please. So we check here this possibility of seeing the vigor of the vegetation, and this can also be used in the future for carbon calculation estimate. So I wanted to bring here quickly is to present developing in the state the pioneering tool in Brazil for control, monitor, and traceability of agriculture production that demonstrates the Maranhão government's concern with social environmental issues involving the food supply chain. Next, please. It's important to emphasize that this data will become public with the new version of CIFMA 2.0, which is the partnerships with CIT and can be used by the Chinese market and other consumers market to certify that soybeans produced in Maranhão meet national legislation and international sustainability standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Victorio, for your informative presentation. And also let us know about the soy business is a kind of a bridge linked between your place and here in China. And also the advanced systems you showed and the validation data are more important for all the businesses along with the supply chain. And last but certainly not least, we have the pleasure to count on Miran Neal. She is working with 3Q within the sustainable commodity practices area with a focus on soil supply chains. And she will talk about the retail soil group and how they intend to standardize reporting and the data sharing. It's your turn.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and good evening. Thank you for the invitation to join this webinar today. So we've been asked to talk about some of the ways in which the Retail Soy Group has been working together. It's a pre-competitive forum of retailers working on simplifying supply chain engagement and reporting around soy. So I'll talk you through some background to the Retail Soy Group and what we're doing right now to help the sector move forward on this critical issues. So next slide. So the Retail Soy Group was founded 10 years ago as a space for downstream customers that weren't really engaged with this commodity to upskill and understand what needs to happen in the market to help address sustainability challenges around soy production. So ultimately, it's about being a group of committed retailers that are seeking to buy and source soy within responsible supply chains. And our members are from all over the world, from Australia to Europe. Next slide. One way One way we've been working together to upskill the sector is by providing resources both for the retailers themselves as well as for their supply chains. So around this time last year, we launched an e-learning module on the Retail Soy Group website, which is public. You can go there and find a selection of materials and guidance that's accessible to anybody. So if you go to retailsoygroup.org, you'll be able to find the learning button in the top right corner. From there, you can see various modules and resources for use within your own organizations or to engage your colleagues or your suppliers that might be interested in these issues. So the e-learning modules start with the basic concept of what soy is and how it's traded before going into why there are challenges and what can be done. And the other modules cover how you can manage risk in the private sector and the supply chain, and also gives resources around the business case before moving into some of the practical details around how it is you can adopt a credible commitment and work with the supply chain on implementation and monitoring and communicating a retailer's actions. So today, we're really looking just at the monitoring progress side of things in this presentation, but for the other modules and greater depth than what I can cover in these few minutes, you can just visit the website and explore it yourself. Next slide. So as you can see, some of the materials that we have, you can go into some detail, and it can get very technical very quickly, but even the things that are seemingly simple, like what's your policy on deforestation-free soy? It introduces terminology like the cutoff date, and this is sometimes difficult concept to explain to the downstream companies. So in this example, you can see how it can be interpreted in different ways, and it's critical we understand the words that we're using and that are used in legislative frameworks like the EU deforestation regulation. So for this particular e-learning material, we developed this together within the Retail Soy Group from an implementation perspective for retailers. So we needed retailers to understand how they need to put dates into their policies to promote transformation throughout their supply chains. So you can see that we might often be referring to what is known as a cutoff date for land conversion, so land use change. And this you typically would find in retailers' supply chain commitments. So the cutoff date is the point after which the production of a landscape cannot have experienced any type of deforestation or conversion. But there are also other dates that are relevant to implementing their commitments, notably around when you need to verify the supply chain and when you might start taking action commercially if there's non-compliance. And these three dates are not always the same. So there are usually three different dates that we would see within organizations, and helping colleagues and suppliers understand this consistently with their customers and having the same timelines and dates are core principles for us to be able to support the whole value chain in this transformation. Next slide. So if I just speak for a minute about what we're currently doing in the RSG, in the Retail Soy Group, where what we're looking at doing is aligning around some core principles for what is reasonable to report within a supply chain in terms of making sure that the effectiveness of a policy is really focused on the areas that are going to make the most difference. So one question we've been working through together is whether there should be a threshold for a minimum quantity, a minimum volume of product to trigger any type of direct reporting requirement. So that's not to say that retailers won't engage the supply chain on all the requirements for their business. It's just more about when to ask suppliers to provide direct data from their systems around how procurement is taking place. So to give an example, if you have a supplier of fish oil, it might be that the amount of fish oil in the product you're buying is very small and you don't even know if it's farmed or wild as an input. So the supplier to a retailer might only be providing 1 or 2 tons of this product over the year. It's just a small additive in a ready meal, for example. and having them engage in a cumbersome reporting process may do very little to advance sector-wide change. So by working together to align on practical details like this, like the minimum quantities needed for primary data, and aligning that across a number of retailers, we can make sure the supply chain puts efforts into reporting on the real impacts of where soy is being used. So in poultry and pork, for example, and that's where the focus for supplier engagement is most likely going to be greatest. Some of the other key areas we're working on is around the definition of verified deforestation and conversion free. It's not so much the words in the commitment, but what we mean before and after 2025 in terms of whether certain types of certification can be considered to be transitioning to EDCF, and whether this kind of terminology is useful. The 2025 date aligns with the EUDR and perhaps other deforestation regulations that are emerging, and with market requirements in France, the Netherlands and the UK. And it's very clear what's acceptable after 2025 for the EUDR, but the bridge to get there is still a little hazy. So that's under discussion in the RSG at the moment. And then also on the definition of low risk origins, which will be clear in future when Europe releases their method and classification. But for now, in the interim time, there's no common list. So we have CDP, we have the UK Soy Manifesto, and some companies are developing their own criteria for it. And the Retail Soy Group is a space where we can all come together and agree on some of the specifics for now, considering what we think will come in the future as well. Next slide, please. On reporting a bit further, just want to say, once we have that kind of alignment on the frameworks, it's possible to provide collective reporting mechanisms to make monitoring easier and more robust across a number of downstream companies in a consistent way, whether they're retailers, manufacturers, or the hospitality sector. And by aligning all within the same methodology, we can work together and ensure there's consistent action occurring within the supply chain and try and cut out confusion on these core issues. So that's something we do through the Soy Transparency Coalition and the members of that listed here. So I will wrap up now. Thank you very much for the chance to speak today, and hope this was a helpful contribution.
Many thanks, Miriam, for your informative presentation today. And as far as I know, 3Q working continually to sourcing and buying soil with a responsible attitude. And what she taught us about the e-learning system, just to create a systematic solutions to all the market. Thank you, all of the speakers. And I'm so honored to tell that's all presentations we have today. And with this wealth of knowledge, the speakers have shared with us environmental climate impacts of soil and the tech system or tech solutions for the soil traceability, and also about the governmental support, and also the current development status in the soil traceability technology, and also about the retail experiences, etc. So well, I think we are now ready to start the Q&A session. Julie, I'm sure the attendees have posted very interesting questions, as you say. And which one would you like to raise first?
Thank you, Jean. Thanks so much, all speakers. These have been a super interesting series of presentations. And thank you to the attendees, the online attendees who have posted their interesting questions. We will start with a general one because I realize we have very little time for Q&A now, just 10 minutes. So Richard Pagluch has general questions for all speakers. What international barriers to succeed on implementing traceability are you finding, and how and who should be taking action to overcome these barriers? So what are the barriers and what are the solutions to overcome these barriers? Who wants to start? Based on your experience with your initiatives, what are the barriers you are finding to kind of make traceability even more effective, or even just implementing traceability per se? I see Daniel is raising his hand.
Yeah, Julie, thank you. Yeah, maybe 2 points. The first one is the problem of having different asks from the market. I think that this is a very important point. If we have a unique ask in terms of traceability, of transparency, the things will move faster. And also what we have seen is the question of the collaboration between the governments of more producing countries and the governments of more consumer countries. So with collaboration, technical collaboration, formation of technical group, I think that the question of traceability can be solved faster, because the main traceability and transparency data are owned by the government, the national government. So this is an important point. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks very much. Felipe, what would you like to add to Daniel's answer?
I think from our perspective, supporting government public traceability systems and public institutions, the main barrier is to have a strong political will. And the solution for that is increase and intensify engagement with key stakeholders, private sector and NGOs, and putting everybody in the same table, showing the benefits, showing the law, the regulations, and showing that we don't have any more barriers regarding technology and science. We have already information, methods, systems, and what we need is political will to give access to all data. We need to provide such traceability system, and of course to sustain this as a public policy, because there are a lot of pressures, and when you put a lot of transparency, you have some setbacks, you have some backlash, and of course it's part of a democracy, it's part of the game, but as a public system, we need to engage stakeholders and move forward science and technology to provide the most updated information.
Thank you, Felipe. Very, very good answers. So I think we can now jump into the next question that Matt Sargent raised for Andre. Could you please clarify what sorts of public data sets need to be made more available and integrated? And is this something we see only in Brazil, or can lessons be learned from the way other countries, governments, or actors have made data public on land ownership and legality?
Thanks, Julie, and thanks, Matt, for the question. Well, I mean, there are different data sets that need to be available. So on the producer side, and in the case of Brazil, we are talking about first the validation of the car. I think it's critical. Second, we need to have more transparency on compensation mechanisms. For example, for the forest code, as Felipe said in his presentation, requests a percentage of the farm to be set aside for native protection, which is called legal reserve, but farmers can compensate when they don't have enough vegetation in their farm to compensate in other farms within the same biome. And we don't have data available to check whether farmers who have evidence of a lack of vegetation in their own farm if they are compensating in other farms. So this is a barrier for verification of legal compliance at scale. Also, we saw in our study that there is a huge difference and gap in how states and environmental agencies make data available when it comes to deforestation license. So this needs to be provided in a more consistent way, and so the government can definitely help. So this is in terms of the producing countries, right? And this can definitely be replicated to other countries, and Brazil is ahead when it comes to this. Still lots of challenges, but it is ahead, so it can be used as an example for sure. But also when then we link the producing to the consumer markets, then we need trade data. And unfortunately, a lot of consumer markets, including the EU, don't have transparency on customs declaration data. So we are able to access this, for example, in some countries like China, but in other jurisdictions, this data is not available, which limits, the access for us to understand the links between the exporting countries and the producing countries, and therefore increase the transparency of the supply chains.
Thank you, Andre. Does anyone want to add anything before we jump into the last question? So the last question that we can include today, and there's other questions which have already been answered in the chat. So I think maybe, so this question is for Miriam, but I see that you might have answered to it already. It says, what it is the relationship like between retailers, suppliers, and producers in your initiative? Do retailers get verification from suppliers or producers? And do retailers using suppliers have good visibility beyond those suppliers? Would you like to share a little bit around that, even though I think you already answered on the chat, Miriam?
Yeah, I think you can see my answer in the chat. I would just say it's really evolving, and I think it's going to shift a lot in the next year, because the supply chain has to prepare for EUDR compliance, which will require that kind of transparency and traceability all the way down to producer level. I think our sense is there's only a year to go, and the industry is quite a long way from that. So it's there has to be a huge effort from here on. But I think the regulation gives that impetus, and particularly where companies, where traders are sourcing indirectly, that's where we see the sort of least transparency. So where they have direct relationships with producers, it's often 100% fully traceable, but with the indirect sourcing, that's where the gap is, and that needs to close. But I've put a link to the Soy Transparency Coalition there. So we've just published the 2022 market overview. So that report goes into more detail about how we see the current state of the market.
Thank you, Miriam. Thanks so much for your answer. Thanks all speakers for your excellent answers and presentations. I give the word to Jean, who will be closing this third webinar of the series already, and I will be just introducing the next one at the end.
So thank you, Julie. Thank you all speakers for your insightful presentations today, and the informative roadmaps and the case studies. And certainly for all participants for your interests as well. And it is believed that all stakeholders are working closely together to promote the green transformation of the market and help the resilient development of the global industrial chain. And of course, China is the world's largest soybean importer and plays an important role in the soybean supply chain. And as we connect with enterprises in supply chain, we may aware about the people are getting interest to the import impact of the production and the distribution of major food commodities on natural resources, biodiversity, and climate change, and ready to work with all of you to achieve a better world and a vitality planet. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jin Chang, our expert moderator, and to all speakers again who have shared their knowledge and experience with our audience globally. And before finishing today's webinar, I just wanted to remind you that next Monday at 11 British Summer Time, we will be running the last webinar of the series, which will be focusing on beef traceability, with a focus on Brazilian production and Chinese consumption too. This last webinar will be followed by 2 in-person workshops focused on soy and beef traceability in Beijing, and we will be sharing the outcomes from these private meetings in the near future with you, of course. So just check out the registration links that will be shared on the chat. And we look forward to keep in contact and connected with you and to see you next Monday too. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.